The date is June 1st, 2017. This is Tina Peabody, and I am speaking with Rocky Ferraro, former Executive Director of the Capital District Regional Planning Commission, or CDRPC, between 2003 and 2016, and we are speaking in his office at the University at Albany today. Mr. Ferraro, thank you so much for agreeing to do this.
Thank you for having me. Looking forward to the conversation.
So let's just start off with how you came to work at the CDRPC.
Well, basically, I was employed as a professional planner in Toledo, Ohio, and looking to relocate closer to family, and my family's from New Jersey, and the position became available with the Regional Planning Commission. I applied for it. I interviewed with Mr. Chen at the American Planning Association conference in Montreal, and from there a second interview occurred, and subsequently I was offered the position.
And so can you talk a little bit about why the CDRPC was formed?
Well, I wasn't here back in the day when it was formed, 1967, 68 period. But basically, at that particular time, the government was providing for more regional cooperation opportunities. There's a program called Intergovernmental Review. When the federal monies are provided for different programs, there was a requirement to have intergovernmental review as part of that. And I think that was part of the genesis of the Regional Planning Commission also at that time involved in transportation planning, and that was something that was done from a regional perspective as well. So those are, as I understand it, two of the reasons why CDRPC was created, but certainly I was not involved in those early stages, so I'm not as familiar with the historical perspective as others would be.
So we talked about the sort of federal push toward regional planning, and what can you say about the CDRPC's mission? Of course, you said you weren't there right when it was formed, of course, but you're familiar with the mission. So can you talk a little bit about what that mission was?
Okay, well, when I started there, certainly our mission was related to provide regional services to the communities within the capital region, the 4 counties, and it's a membership organization to the extent that the counties are part of CDRPC through the legislative process. So the legislature would determine their interest in becoming part of CDRPC, and then the dues are paid accordingly on an annual basis to CDRPC. And the bylaws were established for the 4 counties. That was the original interest in the Capital District Regional Planning Commission, and to this day that remains. The 4 counties that were originally part of CDRPC continue to be part of CDRPC today. The mission at that time, it was once again to promote regional coordination. The federal government was requiring that through the federal programs to get intergovernmental review. But more importantly, there was a recognition of the importance of communities working together to solve common problems. Also at that time, in the early stages, data, and access to data was very important. And because that was before we had computers and access to the internet and things like that. So if someone needed data from a secondary source from the U.S. Census, which is done every 10 years at that time, where they're going to go to, where's the go-to organization. And so CDRPC filled a significant void at that time as the go-to entity for secondary data sets that were available through a variety of government sources. And even when I started there at CDRPC in 1985, there was a lot of people who came to CDRPC. They would either call up and we would provide them the information. It was hard copy books. It wasn't, once again, we didn't have internet opportunities, but it was hard copies. Or folks came to our office. We had a room set up, a library set up where individuals could come in and access to data sets that we were provided by the government, be it the federal government or the state government. We were identified as a state data center. A regional organization that provided data resources to, in our case, the 4 counties that made up the capital region.
And so, quick follow-up. So you mentioned not having computers initially when you came on, But computers, of course, began to quickly develop after that. So would you talk a little bit about how that technology changed your role as a data system provider, information provider?
Exactly. So, at the early going was, we were the only opportunity to access the data. However, with the introduction of the internet system and things like that, everyone had access to information at their fingertips from their location. So our role transformed to translating data into information. Data is good, but then what does it mean? How do you apply it? How do you make it user-friendly? So there's a lot of data sets out there, but to transfer that into information so the consumer has the data that they need in order to move forward with their initiatives and objectives. So as a resource center, we provided the timely, accurate, and focused data that you needed in order to translate that data into information to achieve your objectives. Also, we've taken that data sets and we created profiles also for our communities in the capital region. So off-the-shelf opportunities that were presented to the stakeholder who need information, demographic information, socioeconomic information about individual communities in the capital region. We had it off the shelf that we would provide that to them, so they didn't have to go about and do that research on their own independently.
And so how would they use this information?
They would use it for a variety of purposes in the public sector, for grant applications, for development service delivery programs. We want to establish a particular program. Well, what's the demographics? What are the socioeconomic characteristics of the population that we will be serving? So that was very important information in order to provide for the most efficient programs to meet the needs of the client that you're hoping to serve. So data provides that basic set of information that's needed to provide the data services. In the private sector, in terms of marketing, information that they need in terms of identifying their consumer base. For the not-for-profit community, once again, they're service-oriented businesses and activities, and they want to make sure that the outreach is being achieved, that they need to achieve. So data is the foundation of decision-making, if you will, and it's very important that we continue to serve in that role for all the stakeholders in the capital region, the public sector, the private sector, and the not-for-profit sector.
And so you described how some aspects of the work that the CDRPC did change, especially because of technology. How would you say the mission evolved over the time that you were there?
Well, the mission also, it evolved, that we're as a resource, and I keep saying a resource center within, because that's what we are. The Capital District Regional Planning Commission, we don't have any regulatory powers, okay? And we don't have any taxing powers. So we have the power, if you will, of persuasion, educators. And that's how our role has evolved in working with all the stakeholders in the capital region to be good listeners and understand what their issues are and to provide them the resources that they need in order to achieve their objectives. Everything ranging from data to providing the systems that are necessary to implement different programs. Looking at opportunities to share opportunities in terms of services. And a classic example, before I became executive director, Mr. Chen and the efforts to create a secure juvenile secure detention center here in the capital region. The reality was that it was very important that we have that type of facility located in the capital region, because prior to having one located here, the children and those 15 and younger who were accused of committing a fairly significant crime, they were sent to a secure detention facility. Before we had a facility here in the capital region, they either had to go downstate or in the central part of New York State, which creates a variety of problems, both socially and fiscally, associated with sending a child of that age, 100, 200 miles away. But no one county could afford to, take the initiative to create the secure detention center here in the capital region? Well, why don't the 4 counties work together as a team to achieve that, to provide that service? And once again, we recognize an issue, and we had the ability to facilitate the discussions amongst in this case, the counties that were interested in creating this entity, and going through all the necessary work from the financial to the legal, because the state statutes did not allow for the creation of a regional secure detention center either, because many of our state statutes were very old. They were established at a time when regional governance was not on anyone's radar screen, and that continues to be, to some degree, the issue today. More recently, since I became executive director, with the combined sewer overflow the requirements, the EPA has rules and regulations in place that state that discharges into our rivers has to be minimized, if not eliminated, associated with combined sewer overflows. Many of our cities in this country have a single pipe. That single pipe transmits the sewage from your home as well as the rainwater from the streets into a single pipe that goes to the treatment plant and is treated, and then it's discharged into the riverbed. However, during a very heavy rain event, the treatment plant cannot handle all the water that goes into the system. So there's regulators that is such that when there's a heavy rain event, the regulators go down and the water goes directly, untreated water goes directly into the Hudson River, or into the riverbed. So in our case, we had 6 communities that had a consent order that had to address this problem. Should you prepare 6 individual plans, or should you prepare a single regional plan? And the decision was to prepare a single regional plan. That's where, once again, CDRPC was identified as an entity that could lead this effort amongst the 6 communities and the 2 sewer districts that were impacted by these consent orders, and to provide for a much more efficient system. So that's, once again, that's our role, CDRPC, in terms of being there, the go-to entity to assist communities in identifying the most cost-effective measures to address a problem that's been identified. And that's how our mission has evolved over time in terms of that type of effort.
So let's talk more about this combined sewer overflow project. Could you actually back up and explain, you explained why the project was needed a little bit, but can you explain why you came to tackle this issue a little more, and the plan itself?
Okay. Yeah. Basically, as I pointed out, there were 6 communities: Albany, Troy, Waterville, Green Island, Cohoes, and Rensselaer. These 6 communities, all along the Hudson River, about 20 miles separation, if you will, from north to south from the city of Rensselaer, north to the city of Cohoes, were required to address combined sewer overflows in the Hudson River. As I pointed out earlier, there's these discharges that occur. They were legal discharges that occurred into the Hudson River with these combined sewer overflows. But because of regulatory requirements and in order to Clean Water Act and things like that, because the Hudson River is a tremendous asset that we have to build upon. It's not a sewer, and from a historical perspective, our waterways were a convenient way to discharge water and waste. And as such, that's where we got industrial development along our waterfronts, highways along waterfronts, because they weren't looked at as in terms of an asset to the community. We've realized the importance, not just we here in the capital region, but across the country, realize the importance of our waterways in terms of, for drinking water purposes, for boating purposes, for swimming purposes, the aesthetics associated with that riverfront. And through the requirements that were established at the federal level, there were requirements that we addressed the problem of water pollution. One of those was to address the issue of combined sewer overflows. And as such, these 6 communities were required to prepare a plan to minimize, if not eliminate, the discharges that go into the Hudson River due to combined sewer overflows. So 6 communities had this mandate, a requirement that had to be made, consent order. Okay, so where do you start? and each of these 6 communities are not wealthy communities. It's not like they have money available. Okay, it's easy if you have money, it's easy to fix any problem in some respects. But money was a challenge. So how can we most efficiently? We have an issue we have to address. How can we most efficiently address that issue? Well, why not work together and prepare a single plan versus 6 individual plans? Well, that makes a lot of sense. However, to get from here to there is a significant challenge, and because, okay, we're going to fix a problem in the city of Albany. Who's responsible to pay for that problem? Is it the city of Albany's responsibility to pay for a problem, or is it shared amongst the 6 communities? If all 6 communities are going to benefit from fixing that pipe in the city of Albany, shouldn't all the communities pay their proportionate share to fix that problem in the city of Albany, because that relieves them of having maybe fix a problem in their own city? Of course, it's a shared arrangement. Well, what's the fair share? What is should each community pay 1/6 of the cost of fixing that pipe, or should it be based on some other type of proportionate arrangement? And these are the type of discussions that took place, and also oversight. So the financial implications had to be addressed, and in fact, we came up with a formula based on population and discharges and amount of pervious surface that exists to identify a fair share formula to pay for the costs of these particular improvements. But then the other part of it also is oversight, responsibility, because from elected officials' perspective, they are responsible to their constituents in terms of taxes that are raised, water rates, sewer rates, and things like that. When you bring that to a regional entity, what type of oversight is going to be provided to make sure that my community is fairly represented on that particular board, and then the needs of my constituents are properly being addressed to avoid significant tax increases or water rate increases? So the communities are, I don't say they're giving up something, but it's much easier for the city of Albany or city of Rensselaer to identify the responsible party, and then the party that's responsible for solving that particular problem. But now we're sharing it, okay? Now it's not a specific community's responsibility, but 6 communities' responsibilities. So you had to make sure you had the oversight that was established that was fair and reasonable to all parties concerned. And so the voting structure and things like that had to be identified in terms of for these improvements, because we're talking about a significant cost associated with the $120 million or so of the plan in terms of improvements that have been identified in terms of capital investments over the course of 15 years. So we're not talking pocket change. We're talking significant capital investments are going to be required to address the problem of combined sewer overflows in the Hudson River. And I have to give all 6 communities and the 2 sewer districts, because the 2 sewer districts were also significant players. The Rensselaer County Sewer District and the Albany County Sewer District also had a significant role to play in terms of implementation of the requirements of the long-term control plan, the Albany Pool long-term control plan that was prepared. So a lot of cooperation, and it was a spirit of cooperation, but that didn't occur overnight. You have to develop a relationship, and that was part of our role. Relationship building amongst the 6 communities and the 2 sewer districts. Because we're not just talking about within one county, 2 separate counties. 4 of the communities and 1 sewer district is in Albany County. 2 of the communities and 1 of the sewer districts is in Rensselaer County. We had varying sizes from City of Albany at 100,000 population to Ward of Elite that has several thousand population. So you had a lot of, a lot of different parts that were required to evaluate, in addition to our requirement that we, our ultimate goal was to prepare a plan that addressed the sewage discharges into the Hudson River, combined sewer discharges into the Hudson River. So that required a time to work with these communities, establish relationships, as well as work with the environmental advocates, because the advocates were very concerned about the quality of the water in Hudson River. Once again, we're dealing with drinking water issues, recreational issues, and recreational and drinking water issues. So it's important from everyone's perspective, and the advocates want to make sure that the requirements are going to be met. As advocates, that's their role and responsibility. So we worked with them also. We brought them into the discussions and things like that. Not at the end of the process, where this is our plan, what we're going to do, but at the beginning, and from issue identification to goal development, objectives, to plan development itself, and to try to create a spirit of cooperation, recognizing that ultimately the communities are financially responsible for implementation. So we had to be realistic in terms of dealing with the constraints that we had from a financial perspective, as well as understanding that we have to meet the requirements, because everyone wants to achieve the goal of clean water. It's just how do we get from here to there. And I think it was an effort that I'm very proud of CDRPC leading this effort, working with the federal government, state government, the environmental advocates, the county government, the 6 communities, all the stakeholders involved in bringing them around the table, and having these discussions leading to the preparation of the long-term control plan, which we're in the 2nd or 3rd year of implementation at this time, over a 15-year period. And it was a spirit of cooperation amongst all the parties, from the regulatory agencies, the advocacy groups, the communities, that we have what I think is an excellent plan, a model plan of regional cooperation that 15 years from now, the results you'll see that we have much cleaner water as a result of stormwater discharge than we had when we first started this effort.
So would you actually explain what the plan was? What and I know it's probably complicated,
Yeah.
but what were sort of the phases of the plan and
Well, the first phase of the plan, if you will, was to identify the mechanism from which these communities were going to work together. So it wasn't so much about the bricks and mortar, if you will, the capital investments itself, in as much as, okay, we're willing to work together, but we need a basis from which to move forward on. So what we're going to be the basis for the regional cooperation, because we weren't going to create a new government entity. We weren't going to be eliminating these 6 communities, okay? We're looking at one shared service, combined sewer overflows, and addressing that particular problem. So the first phase was to evaluate the opportunities to work together, the challenges and opportunities to work together. Does this make sense? And at the end of the day, yes, it made sense. And we established the protocols and framework from which the 6 communities would work together, including the governance structure, as well the legal requirements, and the financing associated with the plan. The plan itself was an engineering challenge to identify both the gray and green infrastructure requirements to implement the plan, because the bottom line was to significantly reduce the stormwater discharge, combined sewer overflow discharges into the Hudson River. So we had to have brought engineering consultants on board to work with the communities to prepare a plan that most cost effectively achieve these objectives. And so ranging anywhere from introducing pervious surfaces, so the water is absorbed on site. So it doesn't discharge into the pipe to begin with. So the water never enters that combined pipe system. To looking at significant investments one of the largest investments is called Big C, which is a major discharge pipe that exists on the Hudson River below the U-Haul building, and basically across from the Rensselaer train station in the Hudson River. It's a very large pipe system. So that takes a lot of stormwater from a very large geographic area within the city of Albany. And so how are we going to address the discharges associated with that? And that's a $40 million investment, if you will, to address that problem, which requires underground storage and things like that. But have the rainwater enter the pipe, but don't discharge into the Hudson River. Have a holding area for an underground storage area for that, and then and control the discharge into the treatment plant, and then it's discharged into the Hudson River. Because when it goes to the treatment plant, it's treated, and then it's discharged. So there's no harm, no foul there, if you will, literally and figuratively. But it required a significant effort to identify the most cost-effective measures to achieve the requirements that we reduce, if not eliminate, combined sewer overflows into the Hudson River. And each community is different. Like the city of Troy, they have a grid system pattern, and you've got the street system that goes north, south, east, and west. Basically, most of those east and west streets they all have a pipe underneath them, a sewer pipe. And so you have something like 40 discharge points in the city of Troy, if not more than that, in the Hudson River that discharge into the Hudson River. Are we going to dig out all of those individual pipes and replace them with a different piping system, separate lines? So we have a line for the sewage that goes to the treatment plant versus stormwater, which stormwater is still not that clean. There's our issues with stormwater, but it doesn't have the feces and things like that in it. But are we going to invest hundreds of millions of dollars to eliminate all these individual pipes that currently exist and have pipe separations? Of course not. We're going to try to come up with a system that's much more cost effective, and that's why in terms of investing, we'll put our major efforts in the Big C as one, and by eliminating that as a discharge, it will significantly improve the Hudson River, resulting in the fact that we will not have to make some of these other capital investments in other locations. But once again, we are in the city of Troy. There's a number of initiatives underway also. In each of the 6 communities, there are capital investments underway to address the combined sewer overflow problem. So there's no one community that doesn't have to do anything. All the communities have a responsibility to address the problem, but it's a shared arrangement in terms of the cost distribution. So the city of Waterville is not paying the full weight, the full ride to make the improvement in the city of Waterville, similar to the city of Troy is not paying for the full ride for improvements in their city, Albany, and the other 3 communities as well. It's a shared, it's a formula-driven improvement. So any capital improvements that's made in the city of Cohoes, city of Albany, city of Troy, city of Rensselaer, city of Waterville, village of Green Island is being paid for by all 6 communities together as a team.
And so what would you say has been accomplished so far? And what would you say still remains to be done?
Well, the governance structure has been established. The oversight responsibilities have been established. The cost distribution have all been established. So all the everything has been completed, but for the capital improvements themselves. Okay, and you say, well, that's the biggest thing. Yes, it is, but once again, establishing the protocols that are necessary to put this plan in place is extremely important. And as such, now we're in the second, I believe it's the second year of the capital investments that are necessary over a 15-year period. So we're entering in year 3 of a 15-year plan of capital investments, and the plan itself outlines what's going to be done on an annual basis. Now, a lot of work has already been done, was front load it, if you will, in terms of capital investments. So a fair amount of work has been initiated, be it the actual physical improvement itself or the study to get there. For instance, with the Big C project, it's not you just dig up make a big hole, put a well in there, a holding tank, and you're done. It requires several years of study, engineering study, and design to come up with that plan. So we're in those phases of work right now for Big C. For some of the smaller projects, they have been completed. Some of the small sewer separation projects that are occurring in some of the smaller communities, that has been completed already. Part of that is because it was part of a street repaving program and things like that. Well, as long as we're digging up the street, we'll work with the pipe system underneath it to put in corrective measures that are required, that are outlined in the plan. Also, green infrastructure like Quail Street in Albany has green infrastructure. So, as I pointed out a few minutes ago, the stormwater doesn't go directly into the pipe that goes to the treatment plant or the river itself. It's absorbed within the soil. And it's treated internally, and then it enters into the system. So there's less stormwater entering into the system. So there's a range of capital projects, like I said, that have been identified over the course of over the next 12 years that will be implemented, resulting in meeting requirements of the Clean Water Act. In the meantime, we are doing water monitoring. So we go out there, and last year and this year, going out there and taking samples of the river at strategic times to ascertain the effectiveness of these programs. Okay, we've made this investment. Is it working? And so we're monitoring the water quality in the Hudson River, and to determine the effectiveness of our capital investments and what adjustments we may have to make moving forward if they're not achieving with a model, because all this stuff is modeled. Okay, by making this capital improvement, the result is going to be X improvement in the water quality, but this is all model data. Is it actually working? So we're monitoring the river to determine how much discharge is occurring, and is it meeting their standards that are necessary. And if it is, great. If it's not, we have to go back to the drawing board and identify what other measures are going to be necessary to achieve the objectives of the Clean Water Act accordingly.
So there's several things that you brought up there that I think are important. The relationship between the CDRPC and the counties. I think also sort of this tension between sort of financial reality and
right.
Sort of the ideal plan that you have. And I want to come back and talk about that. But first, I want to back up and give some context. Because before you were executive director, you worked at the CDRPC for a while before. And so I want to get a sense of your time in those early years and sort of under Cheng Chen, and what the primary challenges were facing the capital region. Obviously, combined sewer overflows are one. But what were some of the main challenges that we're facing over the course of that time, and how did that evolve?
Well, it's interesting because before the combined sewer overflows did not hit the radar screen until the late 80s, early 90s, if you will. to federal legislation. And the communities in our region, the 6 communities in our region, Waterville, Cohoes, Waterville, Green Island, Albany, Troy, and Rensselaer, were not under the consent order requirements until around 2001. Because at the federal level, they were going after the larger cities first, in terms of the consent orders. So it was a gradual effort from the regulatory agencies to address this problem of compliance overflows. But so prior to that, what we worked on was other water quality related issues, dealing with best management practices for agricultural, because when we talk about water quality, there's point source pollution and non-point source pollution. Point source is from a pipe. Okay, and that's where you get the combined soil overflows. It's an identifiable pipe. Non-point source pollution is a little bit more challenging, with everything from your front lawn, if you put pesticides on your lawn, and you put the pesticides, it goes into, it gets washed away, it stays on the driveway, it gets washed away, it goes into the sewer, and then it goes to the stream. See, in our suburban communities, the good news is we have separate source systems. We have, for the sewage discharges from your house, go to the treatment plant. Okay, the stormwater, the sewer in the street there's a pipe. That's a separate pipe. It's not unlike the cities. It's not the same pipe. It's a separate pipe. So you don't get that. You don't get them combined together. The good news. The bad news is that the stormwater, unlike the sewage from your house that goes to the treatment plant, stormwater goes directly into streams in our suburban communities. So in our cities, technically during dry periods and things like that, the stormwater is treated at the treatment plant because it's a combined system. It all goes to the treatment plant, is treated and discharged into the river. In the suburban communities, that is not the case. The sewage from your house goes to the treatment plant, but as I pointed out, the stormwater goes directly into the streams. Well, that's polluted also. It's a different type of pollution, but you get everything from lawn pesticides to dog feces and things like that. People don't clean up after their dogs, and it's in the along the gutter area there, and then it rains and it goes into the sewer and it goes into the stream. So, as well as working with the agricultural community in terms of in terms of pesticide use on farms and things like that. These are all contribute to the water quality problem. And so how can we do a better job in planning from a watershed perspective? So CDRPC when I first came on board, was involved, and after that was involved in watershed planning, working with, because watersheds are very important environmentally critical elements, because once again, where do we get our water from? Okay, reservoirs, right, or wells and things like that, and that the water from the streams worked their way to those reservoirs or in our well systems. It doesn't take a rocket scientist basically to figure out that what enters the system, the stream, is going to impact the pond where it's going to be located. Be a well that's underground, which is a pond underground, if you're a stream underground, or a reservoir above the ground, or a lake above the ground. And many of our communities, if not all our communities, get their water either from, they get it from a stream, a river, if you will, a reservoir, or well water, which is, once again, is a stream underground. So we have to provide protections for those areas. And so CDRPC was involved in working with communities to identify best management practices to minimize environmental degradation on these very sensitive water bodies. So we did watershed planning, because a watershed doesn't follow municipal boundary. Okay, streams don't stop at the boundary. So the discharges that occur in a community 10 miles away can have an impact on a community downstream. Even though the initial impact is occurring 10 miles upstream, it's impacting that community 10 miles downstream. So how can we, once again, from a regional perspective, work cooperatively? And New York State is a strong home rule state, which means when it comes to land use regulations, the cities, towns, and villages are responsible for passing zoning and subdivision site plan regulations. So how could we work with them to work cooperatively, from understand the regional implications of that local decision in terms of developing rule requirements that respect activity that may occur beyond their particular border, the actions that they're taking in this community, the impact that it has on an adjacent community or one 15, 20 miles downstream. So CDRPC worked extensively in those areas in terms of watershed management programs and identifying these critical watersheds, especially those that are watershed to our reservoir area. City of Troy is an example. The Tomhannock Reservoir is not in the city of Troy. It's about 15, 20 miles away. That provides water to the city of Troy. But the Tomhannock is impacted by the land use decisions that are made by communities within that watershed area. Another area that we were involved with, which is interesting, was aviation planning. When I first went to CDRPC, there was a regional effort to coordinate aviation systems planning. We always think of the airport as Albany International Airport, because it's a public use airport, and so that's the one most people identify with. But there's a number of I can't think off the top of my head, but there's a number of smaller airports throughout the capital region. Saratoga County has an airport. Schenectady County has an airport. Rensselaer County has smaller airports within their jurisdiction. As well, there's a number of smaller privately owned, privately operated airports throughout the capital region. How do we coordinate the efforts associated with air travel and the issues associated with air travel for capital investments and things like that? Also, with capital investments within those airport settings to make sure that we're maximizing the use of our resources, whatever. Also, the decisions that are made. You have an airport and the planes land at the airport on the runway. Well, there's called the runway protection zone, and you have to make sure that there's not any obstructions in that runway protection zone so the planes can make a safe landing. Well, that runway protection zone oftentimes is outside the jurisdiction of the airport itself. And these are areas that are part of a municipality. So educating, working with the municipal officials on having them understand the relationship between the airport that's located in the municipality and the land use decisions that are made in that proximity to the airport for safety reasons. That program, this is a federally funded program. That program was eliminated in the 1990s, I believe, in terms of that. Federal support, financial support to do this regional coordination effort. So CDRPC no longer provides that directly. But that being said, we work very closely with the folks in particular at Albany International Airport in terms of coordinating the decisions that they make on site and the impact on the town of Colony and vice versa. As well as within adjacent communities. A simple issue is airport noise from airplanes, okay, because they're approaching the airport, and it may be 10 miles away. And so there has to be and people don't recognize that the airports, I don't even see the airport from my house, so how's that going to impact that? Well, are you within that air flight area for the landing? And yes, it may. And therefore, once again, working with communities to identify land uses that will maybe more appropriate in an area that is impacted by airport noise. And these are types of things from a regional perspective we could bring together different stakeholders who normally don't sit around the table together to look at the challenges and opportunities that associate with a particular issue or a problem that transcends municipal boundaries, and that's part of our role. And like I said earlier, in terms of the data, that continues to be also a very important function associated with our responsibilities to translate data into information to make it available to the consumer. And being educators. That's I see in terms of I always saw CDRPC's role during my being involved there as an educator, being good listeners, developing relationships, and working with all the stakeholders involved to come up with identifying the issues and coming up with mitigation measures that will be most appropriate to address the concerns that are being expressed. And I often state that I'm not interested in your position, okay? I want to know what your issues and concerns are, and then how we can identify the most appropriate measures to address those issues and concerns, working together effectively. Your position is your favorite outcome that you want to see achieved. I respect that. But how are we going to get from here to there? That's in a very responsible way.
And so you've mentioned a number of really key projects that you worked on in your early years at the CDRPC, and if I'm not mistaken, you came on as a principal planner.
That's correct.
And so what would you say you learned from Mr. Chen about the planning process through these projects? And maybe how do you think the priorities during his period maybe differed from what you faced when you came in as executive director in 2003?
I wouldn't say the priorities were different as much as they've evolved. And I think Chen was an excellent mentor in staying ahead of the curve, if you will, recognizing these issues early on, so we weren't dealing with crisis management situations, that we were able to be more deliberative in addressing the problems that existed, and being there, working with our partners at the federal government and the state government to identify regional solutions to local problems, and being a resource, everything from data management to regulatory requirements that had to be met, and being a neutral party. We didn't, we did not become politically involved. And I know as executive director, I was not affiliated with any political party or leanings or anything like that. I respected the whole spectrum of attitudes that existed, and I think that's shown at CDRPC, that as the body, the policy board, we have 20 members on our board that represent a whole range of political affiliations, from very conservative to liberal, and their ability to work together through the leadership that CDRPC provided is an example of how we have been successful. That looking at these individual problems and providing regional solutions where appropriate, but also the tools that individual communities could use to address their concerns. So not every problem called for a regional solution. Go to individual communities, and so we worked with them one-on-one to address those concerns and issues, and being a resource to assist them to achieve a desired goal and objective.
So I think you've mentioned a couple of times the CDRPC's role as almost a broker, I guess you would say. I think you said power of persuasion. I think this is something that both Mr. Chen and Tiag, both of them have mentioned. And so I wondered if you could explain a little bit the relationship between the CDRPC and the counties, how that worked, and how you did try to balance your planning goals with the fact that, as you said, you don't have direct regulatory power.
Correct.
How do you do that, and sort of try to remain this neutral party as you described it?
As educators, okay, we bring good listeners, and then you do the evaluations and offer solutions and measures that could be used to address the problems that have been identified. As I pointed out, we have a policy board. The 4 counties are our primary clients, okay? And we were created, under state statutes, and as such, the 4 counties ultimately have the authority over CDRPC. But it's a cooperative venture that exists. But the staff works for the board. The policy board establishes the policy, and there's 5 commissioners from each county that are appointed to our board. Each of the 4 counties appoints those 5 commissioners, okay? And staff and the executive director in particular is responsible, gets the policy direction from that board. And then based on that policy direction we receive, we use our professional skills to reach out to the stakeholders in the region. When I was executive director, I brought to the attention of our board. There's an interest in us pursuing a particular action to get their buy-in to it. I didn't just go out and with the combined sewer overflow project. I didn't just say, okay, we're going to take care of it, we're going to do that. It's a policy board that ultimately makes those decisions. And I respect their feedback and input that they provided me and the direction that they provided me to lead the organization. And I think Mr. Chen did that. I wasn't under Tiag's wing, so I'm sure he did very similar to me in terms of recognizing that we receive our financial support from these 4 counties. It is not a mandated financial obligation on their part. And counties have a lot of financial obligations they have to meet. And they also have to be responsible to their constituents, the taxpayers in their counties, to try to keep the cost of government services as low as possible. As such, if we're not a mandated entity, what is the value of services that we're providing to these counties? What's the justification for these 4 counties to provide the financial support to CDRPC? Because it's not a mandated requirement. And so, as a staff, we had to show them, we had a responsibility to the counties that we are performing services that are of value to their constituents, be it the governments that are part of that county entity, the private sector, and the not-for-profit sector that encompass our region. And being good listeners is very important, that you listen and then be able to offer a strategy and solutions and ideas, brainstorm into those efforts. And I think CDRPC established a reputation that we weren't affiliated with any particular group or entity or advocacy situation. And there was, as I stated to others, that CDRPC had this Switzerland sense about it, that we were neutral. We were a neutral third party that one could go to and receive an honest evaluation of the issue of the problem to come up with ideas in addressing that particular problem. And I respect that, I really do, and I'm very pleased about the fact that I was part of this whole effort. I'm very proud of my tenure at CDRPC. It was the best decision I made to come here in 1985 to work at CDRPC and to continue there. And I briefly, for over 2 years, I did work. I left CDRPC in 2000 to work in the private sector. I had an opportunity to work in the private sector. I always wanted to try it out, see what it was like. I did, and I respected the work I did there, but it made me realize the value of working at CDRPC and the satisfaction I got by working at CDRPC, and I had the opportunity to come back, which I'm ever grateful for. It reinforced with me the role that CDRPC played as an organization, because I was able to see it in the context from a different perspective. And so me personally, as a professional planner, that's what I enjoy doing. I'm not being critical of those who work in the private sector by no means. There's some great, it's a great job in the private sector. For me, it wasn't the best fit because I wanted to embrace my region. I wanted to know my region because I'm working with it, and it was harder for me to work in a setting where I didn't have a full understanding of the issues associated with that particular entity that we were a client for. But in the capital region, the clients are the 4 counties. Everyone knows 4 counties. Being a resident of the 4 counties, being actively involved, I had a good sense of what was going on. So I felt very comfortable in offering guidance and advice to those who sought out CDRPC for support and assistance. And most importantly, the staff. The staff is very critical. It's not about the executive director, it's about the staff. Those are the folks that really work hard for the reputation of CDRPC, especially with data services and things like that. Going back to that, many times, that's how we're recognized, and people contact us for information or to get a better understanding, even though there's the internet out there, okay? Well, translating that data into information is so important. We're a resource for that, and we provide them that objective analysis and understanding. We make it user-friendly, and so it's very important that the staff, because they are very visible, and we've had very fortunate. The staff I've worked with was second to none at CDRPC during my tenure as executive director, for us to take on these challenges and be very successful with the outcomes associated with those challenges that occurred as a regional planning organization. Everything from data services to water quality to economic development. That's another area that we haven't really spoken about too much yet, but economic development is another area that CDRPC has a critical role in, which I'll be glad to talk about.
Yeah, absolutely. Would you talk more about your economic development goals? And you can also speak during Chen's time, because I'm sure you were involved at that point.
Yes, yes. Now, CDRPC, our role, our direct role in terms of economic development is that we receive financial support from the federal government, for the EDA, Economic Development Administration, to provide regional assistance as it relates to economic development opportunities. We, however, once again, it goes back to that being that resource. We're a resource to the communities in our region, the economic developers in our region. We don't go to trade shows and things like that, promoting a particular county. That's the responsibility of those individual counties and those communities. So we're not going to duplicate the efforts that are already in play here in the capital region as an economic development entity. We're here to supplement the work of those economic developers that exist here in the capital region. And so one of our major programs is a foreign trade zone program, where we are responsible for administration of that particular program, where an entity can, a zone is created, a zone is created, and if an entity is located in that zone, they are deferred from paying import tax on goods that come into the country, because certain goods you have to pay a tax. If you're a manufacturer and you're making a widget, you need the raw materials to make that widget. So some of those raw materials are imported from other countries. When that comes into enters the United States, it's subject to a tax. By having a foreign trade zone, it could be located in that foreign trade zone. It's not taxed until it leaves the foreign trade zone. So by establishing a foreign trade zone, your tax could be significant. It is deferred at best, but it also could be significantly reduced because if that raw material is brought in to make that widget, the waste is not part of the subject to the tax and things like that. So it's a little bit complicated, but relatively straightforward at the end of the day in terms of bottom line savings to the client, in that they have the upfront savings in that they don't have to pay the tax initially, so that cash flow issue is preserved, and then when the tax has to be paid, if it has to be paid, it's usually at a reduced amount. And then that provides economic development opportunities right here in the capital region, because that manufacturing operation stays in the capital region. because the taxes are the taxes are reduced, can be reduced significantly. So the cost of doing business as a result is reduced. So the bottom line is a net plus for that manufacturing entity to be a designated foreign trade zone, or a warehousing facility to be a designated foreign trade zone location. So that provides economic development opportunities here for our workers in the capital region by those who take advantage of that program. That's a specific program that CDRPC is responsible for. So for other economic development activities, like I said, we serve as a resource to those that are involved in promoting their respective jurisdictions in and around the capital region, and we provide them the data that they need in order to market the region. In terms of once again the demographics, the socioeconomic characteristics of the population, something that we have provided to them.
And so, do you think the foreign trade zone program in particular, do you think it had, or to what extent do you think it impacted the capital region's economy?
Well, like everything else, it wasn't a game. It wasn't a. I can't think of the word. It wasn't something that was changed the whole economic well-being of the capital region, but every little bit helps. This is one piece of a very large puzzle to provide economic development opportunities. And when you're talking hundreds of thousands of jobs, how many overall in the capital region, and you're talking maybe several thousand that are impacted by it. Now the net impact is not significant, but if it's your job that's on the line, that manufacturing unit is going to close down because that manufacturing is going to close down, then it's you that's personally impacted by it. The impact is that much more significant. So this is one of many tools in the toolbox to promote the economic well-being of the capital region. It by itself, it's not a game changer. That's the word. It's not a game changer all by itself, but it's one piece of a large puzzle to promote economic development opportunities in the capital region.
So while we're talking about economics, one thing that it seems changed a bit in the economy, especially during your time as executive director, is the growth of this tech industry.
Yes.
Can you talk a little bit about the growth of the technology sector, things like SUNY nanotech emerging, and how that influenced your economic planning, if at all?
Well, yeah. Well, it's interesting. We were not on the in the forefront of that whole effort. We were behind the scenes supporters, if you will. I think the Center for Economic Growth in particular was the entity that carried a lot of the weight associated with Crane Tech Valley and working with their partners to achieve that particular objective. But we were one of those partners. Okay, we didn't take the lead, and that's another important thing about CDRPC, in terms of the respect that we have. In certain things like the Combined Store Overflow Project, the Secure Detention Center, we were the lead entity. And we took the leading role. The data center services were the lead entity. In other activities and other actions, we take more of a secondary role. But that being said, still a very critical role in advocating for the capital region, and marketing the capital region. And this is an example of that in terms of the role of technology. And CDR and the capital region has been very successful, because we see what happens when regions do not try to stay ahead of the curve. The fact of the matter is, change is inevitable, especially with today's technology. Back when I started my career, you go from one generation to another in terms of change that was occurring in the economy. Not anymore. Every decade you got change. It's very important you stay ahead of the curve, because if you don't, you see what happens in terms of employment contraction and the economic negatives that result, and the quality of life impacts that has on the residents. You lose your job, and then your purchasing power is diminished, besides all the personal issues associated with it, and that has a significant impact on a community, on a region. It's very important that all regions in the country try to stay ahead of the curve, and the technology is the way to go with that. We were very fortunate here in the capital region to see that as an issue, and work in partnership with the government sector and the private sector to promote economic development opportunities. It's not without its challenges. It's not without its challenges and without its criticisms, because there was a lot of giveaways associated with the nanotechnology sector in terms of global foundries. They got over $1 billion worth of incentives, actual grants or other types of incentives to move to the capital region. But we see the spillover effect associated with that in terms of our investment in the educational component of it. So it's not just a manufacturing activity to make the widgets, but also the technology needed to research how to make those widgets and to continue to stay ahead of that. And once that widget is made, you don't sit on your laurels and assume everything's going to be good for another 20, 30 years. You have to be involved in researching with the next phase of development to make that widget even that much more efficient tomorrow. And that's what's happening. It's not just the economy. We're not just competing against other regions in New York State or other states in the country. This is an international competition that exists now. We're talking about international economy, and we have to respect that. And I give a lot of credit to the capital region. And like I said, we did take a leading role in that. We were part of that supporting cast, recognizing the importance of thinking about tomorrow. That's what we do as planners, think about the future. We can't predict the future, but we can project what our needs may be, and we have to move towards that desired goal and objective. And it requires an investment, and sometimes it's challenging to get the decision makers to recognize the importance of that, because that requires financial commitments. And we're trying to live day to day, never mind worry about tomorrow. You're talking about 10, 20 years from now. My God, we have to, we have to provide services today to our citizens, be it police and fire protection or road improvements, street maintenance programs. And you're talking about what we're going to be doing 10, 15, 20 years from now. And we have to invest in that. Boy, we can't afford to do that. But if you don't, we see the results. Fortunately, in the capital region, it's been a challenge. We've made those investments, and we're seeing successes associated with that. In other parts of the country, as we speak today, literally today, the effort to pull back on certain actions, activities in terms of like investments in solar technology and things like that, because the negative impact it has on parts of the country where they did not invest in their future and recognize the fact that renewables was the way to go, and it is more cost efficient at the end of the day. And we cannot just sit on our laurels, because change is inevitable. How can we be part of a positive transformation that's going to occur over time? Because if we don't, we see the economic impacts and the quality of life impacts that are occurring as we speak in communities across the country where they were one company towns, and they expect those companies to exist forever. And the fact is they have not and will not, and moving forward into the future, at least yesterday, we could depend upon those firms maybe lasting 40, 50 years. Today you're talking maybe 10, 20 at best if you don't try to stay ahead of the curve in terms of investments in research and technology, and that's investing in our future. And once again, I respect the fact that the challenges represent to our elected officials, because they have to be held accountable to their citizens and how we spend money and how that money is being spent. And I need the garbage picked up in front of my house. I'm not going to worry about the jobs 20 years from now for my children and grandchildren, but we have to, because that 20 years comes awfully fast. And if we don't, we see the results of that.
So on a related note to the tech boom, some of the talk in press at the time was that this tech boom was going to sort of revamp the center city. And one of the things that the CDRPC had wanted to do from its inception was sort of not stop, but maybe the best way to say it is manage suburban growth.
Yes.
And to some degree, they recognized the benefits very early on of high density planning.
Yes.
And so I wondered if you would talk about whether you think the tech boom, or this construction of the technology sector here, whether it has had an impact on suburban growth, and whether it is actually it's having some role in revitalizing the center city.
Short answer, most definitely. Now, the rest of the story, if you will, on that. You know, when the drivers of development, if you will, is transportation, water, and sewer. Okay, they drive development. If you don't have water and sewer, you're not going to have development. Transportation, both a driver and responder to development. When we built Interstate 87, north of Saratoga County in the 60s, that opened up Saratoga County to a large amount of development. And that suburbanization process really took off. And it's a quality of life issue. A lot of people wanted to move to a suburban environment to raise their families. And that goes back to the 1950s, if you will, in terms of the discussions that took place, everything from a policy perspective to TV shows. The TV shows, the sitcom Suburbs, if you call the sitcom comments about the suburbs, Leave It to Beaver, Father Knows Best. These shows were in a suburban location, encouraging people to move to the suburbs. There were commercials out about having your own garage, your car in your garage. One of the more urban shows at the time was I Love Lucy, which you're too young to remember or even know about. But I Love Lucy was, the setting was in New York City. Okay, little Ricky was born, baby Ricky was born. Where did they move to? They left their apartment in the city to move to Connecticut, the suburbs. This was the way to go back in the day. And our investments in government expedited that movement to the suburban locations. We invest in new infrastructure and water lines, sewer lines, and transportation systems to accommodate growth in our suburban communities. At the same time, in our cities, those capital investments weren't being made. And we talked about the combined sewer overflows earlier. These pipes were put in 100 years ago. They don't last forever. Our school systems, the buildings, they were very old. They were built before the turn of the century. And I don't mean the 20th century. I don't mean 2000. I mean 1900. Okay? So the replacements have to be made. We weren't making these investments, so that just expedited the exodus out of our cities into suburban communities. So it was both the physical attributes of the cities that were deteriorating, as well as the quality of life that people were striving for. So many who had the opportunity to make a decision moved to a suburban location. That was the baby boom generation. The millennials, children of that baby boom generation, are seeing things a little bit differently. Not all of them, by no means. And we're talking about large numbers here. So one size does not fit all, by no means. And in fact, even the baby boom generation, there were many who stayed and invested in the cities. But that being said, city of Albany in 1950 had a population of 130,000 people. Okay? It went down to 95,000 by the year 2000. Troy, it had about 70,000 people. It went down to less than 50,000. Schenectady had over 85,000 residents. It went down to 65,000, okay, in the year 2000. Beginning in the year 2000 to 2010, with the 2010 census, we saw some stabilization take place. That continued sharp decline from 1950 to 2000, that 50-year period, was no longer as apparent as it had been the 50-year period. So 2010, we start seeing a change in there. CDRPC has always been an advocate of reinvesting in our cities and the importance of our cities. And now we're seeing the millennial generation, young professionals, they are seeing a positive attributes associated with urban living. And many are interested in an urban environment. The investments in technology are bringing young professionals to the capital region, as well as retaining young professionals. We have a large number of educational institutions here in the capital region, from two-year colleges that are really on top of their game in terms of recognizing the importance of working with the community and identifying job opportunities, be it in the service sector to the technology sector. Hudson Valley Community College, Schenectady County Community College, the two that are located right here in the media capital region. Then you got Adirondack to the north. They're work with their partners, private sector partners, to identify opportunities for the students that they're educating, and then those who want to continue on to a four-year university, working with them. And then we got a whole range of four-year colleges and universities here, everything from SUNY Albany, which is a research center here in the capital region, to RPI, a technology school that is the oldest technology school in the country. Okay, and was created with the Erie Canal. Talk about the technology, RPI. So technology's always been there. Okay, we don't think of the Erie Canal as being something technologically advanced, but go back 200 years ago this year in 1817, and building a canal system to get from the Hudson River to Lake Erie and Lake Ontario. Could you imagine, the technology that had to be applied there? So, who was going to do this design? The engineers. So you brought them together, and that's cluster were created, and RPI was created because of this cluster of engineers associated with building the Erie Canal, and RPI was created. So you got, and then other institutions that exist here in the capital. So we have a large number of educational institutions here in the capital region that have been on the cutting edge of change. How could we keep these folks here in the capital region as they graduate, to retain them here in the capital region, and as students come from other places or from other universities, to attract them here to the capital region? It's a challenge. There is no doubt about it, because we are here in the Northeast. We are competing with New York City, with Boston in particular, as major urban centers. And young millennials are interested in many cases going a more very vibrant urban location. Well, we can't compete with New York City and Boston. We're not going to be able to compete with them. But we offer other opportunities for quality of life. That, you want an urban environment, you could have it. But also, if you want a more suburban or rural environment, you have that. There's a lot of opportunities here, and we're within a short drive distance of these major metropolitan areas as well. But we also have a lot to offer here in the capital region. But in order to attract them, we have to have them job opportunities. Jobs are important. Now, with the millennials, it's also interesting, because unlike my generation, with the baby boom generation, we went where the jobs were. And quality of life was always a secondary consideration, if you will. With the millennials, not all cases, but in many cases, it's the quality of life that's the primary issue, with the job being the secondary issue. We want to move here because we like it here, and we'll find a job. Well, that goes back to the technology sector. And technology jobs, it's hard to find employees for those technology jobs. So if we have those jobs, how do we attract people to the capital region? And that's where we have to invest in our cities, because there's an interest in the millennials in locating in our urban areas that go like the Hudson River. We have to turn that into an asset. That is a significant challenge. We're cleaning up the water quality there, and the city of Troy is in a much better position because they don't have Interstate 787 hugging that waterway and separating the city from the waterfront. There are other challenges that the city of Troy has in terms of the industrial site locations and things like that existed. But in order to make our cities more attractive, we have to invest in those cities. Now, Troy, once again, they didn't suffer the same consequences of the urban renewal program that Albany suffered, as well as, there's pros and cons. I'm looking at that debate now in terms of the Empire State Plaza and how it really destroyed an urban neighborhood, a significant urban neighborhood within the city, and created the plaza, okay? City of Troy did not have that. They still got some great bones in the city of Troy. They didn't suffer the same consequences of that. So, city of Schenectady, to a lesser extent, Schenectady was more developed as a company town with GE, but we have some good structures that exist in all of our major cities here in the capital region. Our three major cities and Saratoga Springs. So Saratoga Springs is a different type of city than Albany, Schenectady, and Troy. But reinvesting in these cities to attract millennials as well as empty nesters, that baby boom generation, attract them back to our cities, because many of them grew up in an urban environment. They moved to the suburbs when they started their own families and things like that. But and baby boomers were, they had fun. Okay, back in the day, they did their partying and things like that. The 60s was not a quiet period of time. Okay, and the 70s in terms of the generation, that baby boom generation coming of age and the issues that existed at that time. So as they become empty nesters, there's an interest in, not all of them once again, but a good portion of them to move back to an urban setting. Okay, and be able to, because we're much more aware that we should not be drinking and driving, as a simple example. So we're going to go out to dinner, we're going to have a drink, that's okay, but not two. Okay, but if we live downtown, we walk to our entertainment centers and things like that, within walking distance, it creates a better ambience associated with safety issues. Also for health reasons, there's a strong correlation between sidewalks and obesity. And to the extent that the more sidewalks you have, the healthier your population is going to be, because it provides a form of exercise, forced or otherwise, that becomes available. And also access to services in terms of in our suburban locations. As we get older, the store may only be a quarter mile away, but could we get from our house to that grocery store or that pharmacy, even though you could see it there, safely? And oftentimes the answer is no, we don't have sidewalks. Okay, so you have to take your car. Should you be driving your car when you're 85 years old? Okay, once again, it's a rhetorical question, but in an urban location, if the services are nearby, there's the sidewalks, you don't have to answer that. It's easy. You walk there, because you're still otherwise healthy. You should not be driving a car, but there's no reason why you cannot walk that distance and things like that. So that provides for empty nesters and baby boomers, as they're aging out, access to services that's not readily available in many of our suburban communities. However, in order for this all to work, millennials, you're single, or you have a partner, wherever the case may be, it's fun to live in the city, in an urban area, and take advantage of the things that we're just talking about here, and all the things that urban environment has to offer. What about when you have having children and they go into school? To what extent are you going to want your children to go to the school systems within our urban settings? Perceived or real or otherwise, the fact that we have issues in our schools. In terms of the education in the urban schools, they're high quality, but your child has to be dedicated to seek out that education, and children are very vulnerable. Okay, and you got gangs and things like that our children could become attached to, and that becomes a very challenging environment for a child to live in many cases. So when that millennial couple have a child or two, are they going to continue to want to stay in that urban setting, or are they interested in moving to a suburban location? So we have to invest in our schools. We have to invest in our neighborhoods to make them safe, in particular, not only just for millennials, and that goes back to the baby boom generation. Schools are not important in terms of a service provided to the baby boomers, because their children are gone. Safety is important. I mentioned a few minutes ago about the desirability to be able to walk to go to the play at Proctor's or wherever the case may be, and then be able to walk home to your condo or to your apartment. Is it safe? Do you feel safe walking that 3 or 4 block distance? So we have to invest in public safety in our neighborhoods. We also have to invest in revitalizing our neighborhoods and providing businesses. The best safety feature you could have in our communities is activity. Okay, activity promotes people being there, and it's going to minimize the opportunities for crime. because there's people there, there's witnesses and things like that. It's not going down the dark alley or a street that's relatively isolated in terms of activity. By having a robust, active environment there, storefront activity, having the drugstore, the supermarket, not the sprawling supermarket. I'm talking about the corner stores and things like that. Having restaurants. These are providing services, but also providing a safety valve in terms of crime, because it creates an active environment that people would be more inclined to walk down. And we've all experienced that in our own lives. When we're walking in an urban neighborhood, we'll consider walking down a street versus not walking down another. Why? Because we see people, we see activity, and we're interested in moving that. So we have to invest in our cities, everything from the infrastructure that combines to our overflows, to the capital investment, to the service delivery programs that are necessary to make our cities attractive. And it's a challenge financially because there's only so much money available. So do we invest in new systems to accommodate growth in our suburbs, or do we reinvest in our existing systems? And it's much sexier to go to a ribbon cutting ceremony with the opening of a new highway or something like that, a new highway interchange, versus digging up old pipes and replacing them with new pipes. There's not much fun in doing that. So it doesn't have the same attractiveness associated with it. But the fact of the matter is, our sewer and water lines are very old. Our highways, our transportation systems, our mass transit systems, things like that, we have to reinvest in those systems and show me the money. And I think it's very important that we keep promoting the need to invest, because it's a much better investment, because the costs per unit are much less in a higher density setting than sprawl. Sprawl does not cost more money than, in terms of services, than you receive in revenue at the end of the day.
So I have one sort of major project question. You mentioned transportation, and that one of the things millennials might be looking for if they decide to move to a center city is walkability, or otherwise having access to transportation. And the CDRPC had a pretty close working relationship with the Capital District Transportation Commission, the CDTC.
Yes.
And the CDTA, the Capital District Transportation Authority. I almost said
Transit
administration.
Authority.
And so I wondered if you could just talk a little bit about your work with them on transportation.
That's an excellent example, once again, of partnerships. The Capital District Transportation Committee at one time was part of CDRPC, and Tiag may have talked about that in terms of that, and Mr. Chen also. By the time I had gotten there, it was a separate entity. It was no longer directly part of CDRPC. But CDTC, that was a separate entity. We have a very strong relationship and continue to this day with CDTC, and they provide financial support for CDRPC. Only in terms of CDRPC's budget, only about 20 to 25% of our money comes from the 4 counties of our budget money. The rest comes from grants and other support that we receive. And in fact, the money that we get from the 4 counties is used to match grants that we do get. Like the EDA grant is a 50% match. So for every dollar that we get from the federal government, we have to match that with $1. That match comes from the 4 counties. CDTC is an example where they provide us over $100,000 a year of financial support. Now we have to match that with, I think it's $33,000. It's a 3-to-1 match or something like that, or $25,000 for every dollar. 75 cents, we pay 25 cents. But in any case, with CDTC, we've always worked very closely with them in terms of transportation planning in the capital region. And it was very interesting because CDTC is an example of looking at services from a regional perspective. And in my opinion, we should be emulating that in terms of other services that we provide. We have a great model to work with through transportation planning. in terms of identifying what our transportation needs are from a regional basis, prioritizing them, and identifying the federal aid and state aid that we get, how that's going to be expended. And the CDTC has a policy board that has representation from the 4 counties, as well as CDTA and CDRPC on there. So we're all partners together in identifying what our priorities are as a region. And it's very challenging because there's much more need than there's financial support available. CDTA, and we have a very close relationship, though it's not as formal as with CDTC, we're on the policy board at CDTC, with CDTA professionally. There's a lot of respect amongst the staff at CDTA, CDRPC, and CDTC. We're all professionals. We work together, and we've been very successful in creating our own little fiefdom. That we recognize the important role that each one of us play as a team in promoting transportation services in the capital region. Now, and it's a big challenge, especially when we talk about mass transit, because we don't have the density that other cities have in terms of light rail and things like that, but for isolated instances. And part of that is because, going back to the way we developed as a region, we have what's called a polycentric development pattern, in that most cities, most regions in the country have a central city and the suburbs surrounding that central city and the rural areas beyond that. Okay, so your central city is clearly identified. In the capital region, we have 3 central cities. We have Albany, Schenectady, and Troy, and then we have a 4th, Saratoga Springs, to the north. Okay, so the center of the region, when you look at a map, it's not one of those 3 cities. You know what the center of the region is? The town of Colony. Okay, and the town of Colony shares a common border with Albany, Schenectady, and Troy. The town of Colony is a suburban community. Okay, with the suburban growth patterns that you find in a typical suburban community. Now it's an older suburban community, if you will. That was the first wave of the 50s development that occurred before they moved further east and west into Brunswick and Rensselaer County, the Greenbushes, further west in Guilderland and Bethlehem, in Albany County, and then along the Northway Corridor in Saratoga County. But so you have this polycentric development pattern that makes it more challenging to provide for mass transit options and opportunities. So CDTA has a very challenging job. And when we look at our commuting patterns, it's not simply going from point A to point B in terms of everyone's coming downtown to work. Well, yeah, they're coming to downtown, but what downtown? Albany, Schenectady, or Troy? Are they going to GE in Schenectady? Are they going to Troy and the downtown area in Troy and the new technology that's being developed there? And are they going to the government workforce in Albany? In fact, the government workforce centrally located in Albany, but you have state governments in Schenectady and Troy as well. So the commuting patterns are not as clear cut as in other metropolitan areas in terms of rush hour traffic, if you will. It's more dispersed. So how does CDTA respond to that in terms of getting the biggest bang for the buck, if you will, and providing and maximizing services to the populations to be served in a cost-effective way? Because they have they have significant financial constraints they're under. They get support from the 4 counties, but they also get federal and state supports as well. Despite our complaints about the fares do not pay for themselves. It costs more to transport you from point A to point B than you're paying in that fare. Okay. Now, what we have done, because we had a lot of discussion about this, and that's why we collectively, going back to part of your original question in terms of how we work together as a team, we looked at the population densities. Can we accommodate light rail? Because there was a big push 10, 12 years ago, 14, 15, or whatever it was, 10, 15 years ago, to introduce light rail in the capital region. But when we collectively, CDTC, CDRP, CDTA, the demographic information, we see they go to us for the demographics. Looking at the population densities, the employment densities, it's not just where the people live, but where people work. So we collected that data, or we purchased that data, if you will, from secondary sources, or a combination of both. Which, and I think it's significant effort. The data just, the data's there, but we have to translate that into information. Okay, so it's not just simply just taking it off the shelf and wow, we got what we need. We have to translate that into information. The information that we needed was the densities and the commuting patterns associated with those densities, where people live versus where they work. And we did this evaluation down what's called the traffic analysis zone, a very small geographic area, to do that type of evaluation. And we identified the opportunities that existed. The end result of that was, well, light rail is not going to work right now, but let's offer bus rapid transit opportunities, a more efficient transportation system. So rather than having a bus stop at each stop, that it would be more, the intervals would be further apart. And also buses would have priority on the transportation system. And we see that in certain critical intersections in the capital region, where the bus goes ahead of all the other traffic in terms of the lights. The lights turns green for the bus before it goes for the other lanes of traffic. We have a dedicated bus lane. So these are options that are being pursued. Is it as sexy, if you will, as light rail? No. Is it as efficient? In some cases it is, and that where it's being provided. And where it's being provided, it started out with the BRT route from Albany to Schenectady. That was the first one. Okay, now that's in place now for 5 years or so, whatever it's been, I'm not exactly sure. But now we're developing 2 additional routes. One from downtown to the University at Albany to Crossgates. That's a very strong critical mass of activity. And then the other is the river route from Albany north to Troy, and then possibly, and then the Cohoes. And they're talking about, I don't know if they've made the decision about going to Watershed or not, because these are, challenging decisions in terms of where you begin in that line. And to offer the BRT route as an alternative means of mass transit, in addition to the bus, it's still a bus, but operates more efficiently. Also, which operates for all the buses in terms of timing, in terms of introducing technology into the equation. Many times people are reluctant to take the bus because they have no idea when the bus is going to come. You're just waiting there. And even though maybe 5 minutes, it seems like a half hour or 45 minutes. But if we have it posted, or you look on your app, the next bus is going to come in 5 minutes, you feel much more assured. Well, it's only 5 minutes versus when is this bus going to come? When is it going to come? I've been waiting here 15 minutes already and it's still not here, even though it may be only 5 minutes. So the assurances, so introducing the technology into the equation provides and being more efficient accommodations, provides for an increased ridership, and by providing that service, provides opportunities for people that want to locate in the city then, because they have that mass transit as an alternative to get around. Because owning a car in the city is a challenge, even in our cities. It's not Midtown Manhattan, but it's still a challenge to find parking spaces and things like that, because our streets are narrow. Parking is limited. Off-street parking is not available in many instances. So how do we accommodate that? Now, in terms of the new construction that's going on, there's a recognition that we have to provide for parking lots and things like that, on-site parking opportunities. So these are amenities that are being built in to attract a baby boom population, a millennial population. It's no longer just providing you an apartment anymore, but having community rooms, exercise rooms, computer labs and things like that are available, that provides an opportunity for socialization as well. So it requires, once again, it's not a public problem, it's not a private problem, it's a partnership, bringing together, working together. And in the case of transportation, it's been an excellent partnership that we've had with CDTC and CDTA, formally and informally as it relates to professional working, building upon the strengths of each of us as professionally run organizations.
And just to clarify, so it was actually Tiag that mentioned the linkage program, and he, sort of said you should ask Rocky about that. So okay. I just want to make sure that I'm covering that.
Okay,
that
that's
program.
Another area. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Now the linkage program, the link between transportation and land use. Okay. As I pointed out a little bit ago, New York State's a strong home rule state. Decisions regarding land use are made by each individual. We have 79 communities here in the 4 counties. Each of those communities make their own decisions regarding land use development patterns. There's zoning regulations, subdivision regulations, site plan review. Okay. Transportation is more of a regional strategy. Okay. But there's a link between transportation and land use. Access is all about access. If you can't get there, then you can't get there. And you need access to get from here to there. In terms of the linkage program, a fantastic program, because CDTC provides direct financial support for communities to undertake land use planning that's linked to transportation. Formalizing that link, we've always knew it existed. That link between transportation and land use existed from day one. That's how our development occurred. Why did development occur when it did? Where it did, in terms of in terms of means of transportation, was the water or overland. So development of our cities occurred along the waterfronts, because that's where you had along the rivers, okay, versus overland. And that's why the Erie Canal became such a critical element in opening up the West to development, because the only way to get from the East Coast to inland, to the Midwest and things like that, was overland. You couldn't go from here to there without going overland, which was a challenge. I mean, you didn't have highways or anything like that. You didn't have trails, or you just got over. There's the waterway that took you there. The canal system opened that up, and that opened up the West to development by having a means to get from point A to point B. Then the railroads came into play shortly after. That's why the role of the canal system wasn't very, for what was a strong, long period of time, because the railroads came into play. Followed by and then you got development along the railroad systems. The village of Delanson in here in Schenectady County, Delaware and Hudson Railroad, the Lanson, this guy's name. Mechanicville, that was where all the engineers lived, the mechanical engineers who ran the railroads, Mechanicville. So communities were created because of our transportation systems. As I pointed out earlier, the introduction to the Interstate Highway, that opened up the Northway and the Northway communities to develop that otherwise was not going to exist. Because prior to that, you had to take Route 9, a much more challenging road to get to your workplace and things like that, versus taking the Northway. So the linkage program provided a recognition at the micro level of the link between transportation and land use, and simple curb cuts. Why is there traffic? Like Wolf Road is a perfect example. All those curb cuts that were built on Wolf Road, that inhibits the flow of traffic, because people are going in and out of driveways, making left-hand turns, right-hand turns, coming in and out. That inhibits the flow of traffic. How can we be more efficient? Now, in hindsight, the service roads. Why didn't we have a service road, either in the rear or in the front? And so only strategically you have some access points onto Wolf Road, with the service road providing access to the individual businesses along there. And when you look on a map, there are some elements of a service road, but was never fully developed. Okay? With the linkage program, with developing communities, okay, how could we be more efficient in managing our transportation system in terms of flow of traffic and access and things like that? For existing urban areas, complete streets. Okay, how can we operate streets not just for the movement vis-a-vis the automobile, but for other means of transportation, for the dedicated bus lanes we talked about. Okay, bike lanes, trails and things like that in our suburbs, trail systems, as well as introducing sidewalks in our suburban locations. Cities automatically have sidewalks. How many suburbs have sidewalks? Okay, that's not it's not on the radar screen. The linkage program, provide an educational framework and the guidance for suburban communities who apply for that money to have a plan, and then through the day-to-day decisions that they make for subdivisions, for site plan reviews, for other investments that they're going to make, use that plan that roadmap, if you literally and figuratively, if you will, as a means to identify investments in our transportation system and the link with land use. And I give CDTC a heck of a lot of credit for making that, recognizing that link and providing direct financial support for communities to implement measures to enhance those opportunities. Because once again, a strong home rule state, they're not going to give that land use responsibility to CDRPC or CDTC or any other regional entity. Home rule is, New York State's here to stay for a while. And because we like that sense of empowerment, access to local government, when those decisions are being made. So how can we provide programs and mechanisms understanding that the link, and that's where the linkage program comes into play, and it has been a significantly sound investment. I know in Clifton Park, where I live, and I'm the chair of the planning board in Clifton Park, the linkage studies that we've used that's provided us money for trail systems, provided me the opportunity in terms of supporting, seeking out support for sidewalks when new development is being proposed, retrofitting. Because, Clifton Park is an example where, a development occurred 20, 30 years ago. We're starting to see adaptive reuse, repurposing buildings in our Exit 9 area, in the Clifton Park Mall area, things like that. So as we repurpose buildings and infill development, okay, creating a downtown type of center that is not just auto-oriented, but also provides a mix of transportation alternatives and a mix of land uses within that suburban downtown setting. So for those who want to continue living in a suburban environment, can continue living there, have an opportunity to live there in an arrangement where they have a townhouse or an apartment in close proximity to services that, yes, they could also walk to that drugstore, to that grocery store, rather than depending upon the automobile or a family member to do that for them.
And so I guess I'm going to kind of come to a conclusion here, I suppose. And since part of this is for to celebrate the fact that the CDRPC is celebrating 50 years, one question I thought it was really important to ask you is just sort of what would you say the CDRPC's legacy is at 50 years?
We're there to help out others. We're a partner in making for a better capital region, improving, enhancing the quality of life for past generations and for future generations moving forward. That we are the place to be. The capital region is the place to live, work, and recreate, and CDRPC is a partner in achieving those goals and objectives and working with others to achieve that as well. And being there as a resource center to assist the public, private, and not-for-profit sector in achieving all our goals and objectives, everything from quality of life to efficient service delivery service programs and activities that are necessary to make us the #1 region in the country.
And also, I like to ask, you've talked a lot about the things that were accomplished at the CDRPC. Is there anything you would have done differently if you could go back?
Yeah, I would have made myself the dictator. I become a benevolent dictator for the capital region and be in charge of everything rather than having to deal with partners and things like that. Just Ferraro calls all the shots. He knows what's best for the world, at least for the capital region. I promise to be a benevolent dictator. Given my Italian heritage, it's part of it's in my DNA. But seriously, what's the question?
I said, is there anything you would have done differently?
Yeah. No, I'm very, very happy with my role there, and I look back with happiness and glee, if you will, in terms of what we've been able to accomplish as CDRPC, given the rules that we had to work with, and I'm very impressed once again when you build relationships that people are willing to work and cooperate. The art of the deal, in my opinion, is collaboration, cooperation, and coordination with all our partners, and not dictating what should be done. So yeah, in terms of I just stated the benevolent dictator, absolutely not. that is never going to work. There's no such thing as a benevolent dictator. We have to work in a collaborative, cooperative, coordinated environment with all our stakeholders and be good listeners, develop relationships, and identify what are the issues and concerns and mitigation measures to address those concerns. That's always been what I felt was important at CDRPC, as well as for Mr. Chen and Tiag, and continuing that moving forward. We have to evolve and change. Okay, we cannot be stagnant. That the technology is when, we have to stay ahead of the curve. And as I point out, just like with the data sets, that was yesterday. Okay, now we have to be there as a resource. We have been, and we must continue to be there as a resource with the changing technologies that are taking place. And now we got the 2020 census that's coming up in 3 years. What role are we going to play in that to make sure our region is fully represented in terms of getting the data that's necessary, so for the future, that when we apply for grant applications and things like that, we make sure that we have quantified our socioeconomic characteristics here in the capital region, and taking a lead role in that, because data is the foundation of decision making. Okay, that's very important, critical role that we have and will continue to play and must play here in the capital region moving forward. And yes, others have access to that data, but are they educated enough to translate that data into information? And working with our regional partners in striving for a better capital region across the board, be it water quality, economic development, data services, service delivery programs across the board, housing issues. We didn't talk much about housing and housing programs and things like that, and the need to address affordable housing issues, because it's one thing to bring millennials into the capital region, but it's also an issue of affordable housing as well, and making these housing opportunities available not only for people moving in, but our residents here in the capital region. And what role does CDRPC play working with our regional partners to achieve those desired objectives moving forward? It's been a great legacy we've had for the first 50 years, and I hope and anticipate that'll be the same legacy 50 years from now, when you're interviewing the 50 years, the 100-year anniversary, that they will have the same very positive things to say about CDRPC. That the feedback I've gotten, received while I was executive director, and I continue to receive now that I'm retired, has been extremely positive about CDRPC. We have an excellent reputation in the community. It's very important that we maintain that and stay on top of it and stay ahead of the curve to make sure that that reputation is maintained moving forward in the future.
So finally, is there anything I should have asked you about that I didn't, any projects that should be highlighted that weren't?
No, I think it pretty much, our work with, I didn't bring this up too much in terms of, when we talk about data, it's also geographic information systems, geography, and how important that is, because, and that goes back to the information. That's right, with generic in terms of information. It's not just the numbers, but translating how those numbers translate to visuals that are attractive to the consumer. And that's where GIS, geographic information systems, is very important. That's all part of our data set. So I want to make sure that comes through in the conversation also, that when I talk about data, I'm talking about not only just the numbers, but how that numbers are presented and displayed. And geographic information systems is very important in that regard, identifying our environmental features and everything else associated with designing our communities for tomorrow. What are the features that exist? Sustainable development is going to be an area that we're going to have to pay close attention to moving forward. Resiliency planning, because of the climate change issues that are occurring due to man-made or through nature itself. The fact of the matter is, climate change is occurring, and how are we responding to that? And resiliency planning is very important and very challenging, because many of these areas that are most vulnerable to flooding and things like that, such as the Stockade neighborhood in Schenectady, are those areas that are most populated and most historical. And how can we, so we're not just talking about eliminating them, or are we talking about eliminating them, but rather how can we design them in such a way to be more resilient to the change that is coming, and to protect our heritage and their attractiveness as historical communities. So this is a challenge that we have before us, and I'm very optimistic that we will be successful if we work together as a team and coordinate and cooperate and collaborate with each other versus dictatorial stating what is best for our future.
Well, Mr. Ferraro, thank you so much for speaking with me today. It was a
Thank
real
you.
pleasure.
Thank you. I have enjoyed it.